You were the word at the beginning, one with God the Lord Most High. Your hidden glory in creation, now revealed in you, our Christ. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. You didn't want heaven without us, so Jesus, you brought heaven down. My sin was great, your love was greater. What could separate us now? What a wonderful name it is. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a wonderful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. How sweet is your name, Lord. How good you are. We love to sing of your name, Lord. Love to sing of who you are. Death and wrote his law of righteousness with power upon my heart. My heart is filled with thankfulness to him who walks beside, who floods my weaknesses with strength and causes fears to fly, whose every promise is enough for every step I take, sustaining me with arms of love and crowning me with grace. Filled with thankfulness to him who reigns above, whose wisdom is my perfect peace, whose every thought is love. For every day I have on earth is given by, so I will give my life, my all, to love and follow him. Oh, to love and follow him.
My feet stub the end of this road, swollen in the heat of my failings. My fingers bleed from shattered dreams. My throat falters. My stomach churns on endless regrets and words rehearsed to beg my way back in. I try to grab for a sense of worth, but the air is thin. Up ahead a figure stands, and I know that I must face him. My shoulders drop, but his are lower, slumped in the weight of a child lost. His chest heaves in love's deep pain. His eyes reach to mine. Arms rise like dawn-lit wings, and now he's running, his face a song. He falls upon me, washing the squandered years in tears and kisses. He pulls me close, those walls I built, so sure, so certain within, collapse now like petals to the touch of his embrace. His words pour like summer rain, weeping those names I've so desperately sought. My child, my pleasure, my springtime bloom, my ever after returned. He holds the bruises like tender flames, holds the sorrow, holds my mistakes, takes the heartbreak, the burning shame, and draws me home.
Paul, in a famous phrase, says that there is no Jew or Greek. And this idea that difference is dissolved, that Christ has come for the whole of humanity.
We're here in Ethiopia, a country that was influenced by the life and teaching of Jesus in the very earliest years, in the first century. In Acts chapter 8, we know that Philip was told by the Spirit to go down to a lonely desert road. He met an Ethiopian public servant coming home. They had an interaction. The public servant was baptized and then brought his new faith back here to his home country. It's just one example in the earliest of years about how the message of Jesus was being spread across the earth. But what was it about Jesus that created a global missionary movement? Well, here's just a couple of thoughts. First, the validity of his own life. There were eyewitnesses that wrote down what they saw and heard. Secondly, Jesus saw himself not as a spiritual teacher or a religious leader. Jesus saw himself as God's Son on earth. His death on a Roman cross, but then his resurrection proved the truth of that statement. And that resurrection was witnessed by hundreds of people, some of whom paid for their belief in defense of Jesus with their lives. Thirdly, Jesus sent his followers. At the end of Matthew's gospel, the last thing that Jesus says to his followers is to go into the world, and as you go, to spread the message of the life and teaching of Jesus. He sends his followers to be missionaries. And fourthly and importantly, the power of the Spirit of God. Philip was moved to go to that desert road by the Spirit of God. The first disciples went from a scared group in an upper room to a group powerfully taking the message across the world. And here in Africa, every day, the power of the Spirit of God is growing the church. You know, Christianity, in the face of persecution and opposition, has actually taken this message to the ends of the earth as people have talked about the life and teaching of Jesus. It's become a global game changer.
The church spread in three main linguistic groups: through the Syriac, which was related to the Aramaic that Jesus spoke, through the Greek language, and through Latin. And because all of that was situated in the Roman Empire, there were open roads and an ability to travel without having to cross so many political boundaries. So the church spread from city to city, or province to province, in the Roman Empire and in the Persian Empire. So it spread along these linguistic lines and was a steadily outward moving connection. I like to think of it was a network. It was a human network. So when we look at the history of the followers of Jesus, we can see each believer as a link in a chain that begins with Jesus Christ himself and his embeddedness in the Jewish people and his calling from God. And then those links in the chain continue spreading in multiple directions across all different kinds of linguistic and cultural boundaries.
We know very quickly, by about 70 AD, you've got the church spread in parts of the Transjordan, just across the Jordan River. It's in Syria, it's in Egypt, it's probably in North Africa. It's probably gone as far as Persia, and certainly I think by the 2nd century, there's a very good chance that the church has also got into India as well. And between Baghdad and Peking by like the 12th century, you've got like 24 major dioceses of the Nestorian church in that area. So there was this very vibrant church across the steppes of Asia, Persia, all the way through to India and China. You don't hear a lot about it, but there's actually quite a very significant history of the church out there.
It's clearer now than it was even 50 years ago that the Christian faith spread out eastward from Jerusalem and Judea as well as westward. So into Edessa, into now what's modern Iran, Iraq, even in some ways, perhaps even a little bit further into what would now be considered the stands of Central Asia. The Christian movement was moving up northwards toward what's contemporary Russia, as well as in the better studied, more traditionally focused upon movement of the Christian faith westward into the Mediterranean, then eventually northward into Europe.
What was Paul like when he was Saul and before he had that experience in Damascus?
You would think you had come across a religious fanatic as if he was part of the Judean version of Al-Qaeda. Okay, because this was a guy who was committed to the Jewish way of life, the tradition of the Pharisees. He thought he was pretty much blameless under the law. He was excelling in the traditions of the elders, and he says he was filled with zeal. And zeal doesn't mean just bucket loads of enthusiasm. Zeal means a willingness to engage in holy violence, to protect God's reputation and to protect the purity and the sanctity of the people of God. He came to target one particular group, followers of Jesus, the Nazarenes, the followers of the way. Eventually they'd be called Christians. He targeted them because he believed they were a rogue cult. He wanted to completely nullify them as a movement. Now, whether that meant suppressing them, scattering them, imprisoning them, beating them, or in some cases even killing them. This was a guy who really believed that the end justifies the means.
He was actually one of the lead persecutors, but he got drafted. He had a much more dramatic experience where Jesus actually appeared to him and spoke to him. People around heard the noise and saw the light, and he became a follower of Jesus when he realized that was the truth, even though he knew he had been persecuting followers of Jesus, he was going to get it too. But he began sharing the message also and was very effective in doing so.
He's on his way to Damascus to persecute followers of Jesus there for all the things they're doing. And Jesus appears to him. He has a vision of Jesus, and we find this described 3 times in the book of Acts. Luke tells us 3 times what happened at Paul's conversion, and Paul alludes to it himself in Galatians 1 and Philippians 3 and in some other places as well. And it's this arresting reversal of Paul. He obviously is instantaneously sort of converted to Jesus, not necessarily converted to Christianity, to a separate religion, but he sees himself now as called to, rather than destroy the followers of Jesus, now he believes that God's glory is revealed in Jesus, and Paul is going to glorify him by bringing the Gentiles, non-Jews, to worship the God of Israel through Jesus.
So Tom, Paul, what did he write and say that was so significant for the time?
Paul is absolutely the key figure in the emergence of the form of Christianity that the world today is the heir to. And the decisive teaching that he argues for and successfully incubates within the infant church is the idea that Christ died for all of humanity, so not just for the Jews, and that the law of Moses, therefore, in a sense, has been superseded. So Paul, in a famous phrase, says that there is no Jew or Greek. And this idea that difference is dissolved, that Christ has come for the whole of humanity, is a fusion of Jewish specificity and Greek cosmopolitanism. It fuses the idea that there is a covenant, that God, in a sense, has entered into a close personal relationship with all the world. And this is a fusion of Jewish and Greek ideas that in Paul's letters will have the power to shape and transform the world.
He's influential for a couple of reasons. I think in part because he wrote letters, and we have them. In part because he was such a deeply theological person, very reflective, and we see that in the letters. He was a Jew that was born outside of Judea, so he's very comfortable in the big Greek cities like Ephesus and Corinth, and he was tireless. And so he just started these small groups that had a chance to grow, even though they were growing slowly. They had a chance to grow, and I think that, and they preserved his letters, and so that made it, I think, a foundation on which the church could build.
Paul's letters are probably, relative to their length, probably the most decisive, the most transformative texts that have ever been written, certainly that are written in antiquity. They are like kind of the sense of explosive power, of transformative power that they contain within them is astonishing. It's kind of like, you're at the radioactive heart of some enormous power station.
We read some of the remarkable things that Paul did in Acts under enormous pressure, and the church grew. In this sort of environment, you almost see that happening again.
The Boko Haram insurgency, plus or minus, has destroyed more than 3,000 churches in northeastern Nigeria, and number of pastors killed go into the dozens of them, more than 100, I would say, in the last 10 years. By 2010, there was this crisis where so many Muslim youths were killed and so many Christian youths were killed within this particular community. But when I came into the area and I said, look, we need to work and deal, we must show Jesus Christ. We can't go on tit for tat, reprisal kind of a thing. And most of the pastors I even spoke with thought I was crazy. I said, no, we must carry the love of Christ. In the thick of the crisis within that community, I had the church close to the Muslim community there. And because it became so intense and the suicide bombings were coming again and again and again to churches, an elder of the community said to me, Hassan, I'm a member of your church, and I think if we can get an AK-47, that perhaps might help.
You wrote a book on turning points in Christian history, and a significant moment was when Constantine made Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire. What difference did that make?
Positively, his conversion to the Christian faith, his favoring of Christianity, meant that the stigma and the intermittent persecution that had affected Christians throughout the Roman Empire would at least come to an end or materially stop. So there was greater liberty to travel. There was now the ability to pull together libraries, to build churches, to have stated times of worship and communion that were mostly free from outside persecution. Negatively, The temptation, once having made it, was to think that the primary goal of the kingdom of God was to have power on earth, when before Constantine, people knew that life on earth was important, but because there was no hope of having any kind of power on earth, the key thing was to honor God first and then to let whatever else happen, happen.
Well, virtually overnight, Christians went from being persecuted to being tolerated and then eventually to being favored within the context of empire. And so the church moved from a decentralized, persecuted mentality to a more confident but also a state church mentality.
You know, I thought it was a great idea. Why not get an AK-47? Because I said, look, I'm a retired military officer. At least we can bring down any suicide bomber as he approaches the church. And I discussed it with a few members of the church, and they thought, why not? I mean, we could do that. Then 2 days later, I think it was on a Tuesday or Wednesday, I met a friend, having reported within those areas a lot. I knew quite a number of people that were into this illegal gun running. So I met one of these young men and I said, what does it take to get an AK-47? And he said, it was going to cost me about 450,000 naira. That's about almost 1,000 pounds. And I said, woof, even if I put the entire offering of my church for a whole year, we can't come up with that amount. But a day later, on a Thursday morning, I was sitting in front of my church, and there's this little girl that comes and she was selling peanuts. And I called this girl and I said, hey, come, let me buy some. And the little girl comes, and I noticed that she wasn't in school early that morning. And I said, why are you not in school? And she said, oh, my parents can't afford my fees. And I said, hey, primary school is relatively free, just a few charges. So I tell this girl, I said, look, go tell your dad that I'll pay your school fees. She says, her dad is dead. He has been killed in the crisis. And I felt, this compassion. And I said, okay, go tell your mother that I'll pay your fees if you allow me. And so the girl, smiled and she starts walking away. I decided to go along with the girl to meet her parents. Now, as I walked, I said earlier on, it's a community where Christians and Muslims had fought. There's a road that separates the Muslim community and the Christian community. So as this girl walks, I now realized she had left the Christian community and she was walking towards the Muslim community. Then I thought, uh-oh, this girl is a Muslim.
In those first 300 years of the early church, how would you describe the mission or missionary movement then?
I think in many ways, the missionary movements of the first 3 centuries of Christian history are very similar to missionary movements in the non-Western world today. The fate of Christianity depended upon the integrity of the Christian communities, the integrity of the gospel message, the integrity of the life that people were living. Really good sociologist Rodney Stark, now at Baylor University, has made the very persuasive and interesting thesis. Early Christianity spread, yes, because the message was effective, yes, because the person of Jesus was attractive, but perhaps most because Christians were simply there in a not very well organized, not too systematic way. Christians were simply there to do acts of kindness, humanity, outreach in situations where Roman culture did not smile favorably on that kind of person-to-person, group-to-group outreach.
If you are being told that if you are baptized in some way, you enter into the family of God, you become a son, you become a daughter of God, you're being given the kind of dignity that hitherto only emperors have been able to boast. And if you're if you're a field slave, if you're a scullery maid, if you're a prostitute chained, being worked to death in a brothel, this kind of dignity is something that is unprecedented. And in time, the dues that the wealthy Christians have to poor Christians means that essentially building up within the apparatus of the Roman state, there is another apparatus, the apparatus of an incipient welfare state. This is something without precedent. It spans the empire. If you're a Christian, you turn up in Carthage or Alexandria or Corinth, and there is a church there, and you're stuck, you can know that the principles of Christian charity will offer you help.
So I walked with her anyway into the Muslim community with all fear and anxiety, because Muslims that came into the Christian communities got killed, and those that got into the Muslim communities also got killed. If I needed to talk to her mother, I should go talk with the imam in the community. So I went and, to the home of the imam, and he said, you need to meet with the mother because she wants to see who is paying the fee for a girl. So he sends for the woman, and the woman just comes, she goes straight down on her knees. She says, thank you for trying to do this, because I have some 2-3 other children who can't afford. That's why actually the girl is hawking, so that she could get some money for the family. So I thought, well, I asked her, what else can you do so that might help, with getting some money into the family? She said, well, she really doesn't know how to do anything. I said, okay, so supposing I'm able to get somebody who will teach you a little skill so that you could now, do something to help with the family. And she said, that would be great. She said, actually, there are, 3 other women. Incidentally, of course, as a Muslim, the man has some other wives. So I said, well, that's okay. I can handle that. And she said, well, and the other children that are not going to school. I said, how many are there? She said, there are, I think, another 4. I did a quick math, and I said, well, I can also handle that. So we set the next Saturday to meet, and I said, look, as I was leaving, I said, look, not only if there are any other widows, Muslims, who you think need help, why not talk with them? One teacher can handle a whole classroom, so it doesn't really matter. 3 weeks down the line, 86 women turn up. And among the 86, there are about 146 children who are not in school at all. So I quickly panicked and I called my bishop and I said, look, I have a problem here. And he said to me on phone, he said, Hassan, go ahead. Maybe the Lord is doing something here we don't know. Just go ahead, we'll raise the money somehow. And 1 year down the line, we've trained 250 Muslim women in one skill or the other. And we had close to about 200 children that were in one school or the other.
Going back to the early church. Yeah. So faith started in a tiny corner and then
backwaters of the Roman Empire. I mean, in the middle of nowhere.
300 years later, Constantine makes it the religion of the Roman Empire. How did that happen?
Well, so part of it was, if you look at it from a secular perspective, and people do, part of it is it met the needs of the day, right? It elevated the underclass. It valued women. It cared for the poor. Matter of fact, it was interesting as Christianity explodes across what was then the Roman Empire. Now keep in mind too, it's not just exploding in the Roman Empire, there's also work going on outside the empire. In the plague of Cyprian, now Cyprian's the bishop of Carthage, and it's kind of a pain to have a plague named after you when you were the person who was working against it. Yeah. So the plague hits, and what people do in a plague is they fend for themselves and their families. They burn the bridges into town. They burn their neighbors' houses if there's disease. So Cyprian gathers the believers in the heart of Carthage and says, no, not us. We're going to care for anybody and everyone, regardless of their belief or their abilities. And they did. And so when you see that for a few centuries, you get a Julian the Apostate calling these impious Galileans his enemies, because the pagan priests won't do what the regular followers of Jesus are doing because they believe Jesus told them to do it.
One of the comments that Jesus makes that really reverberates through is this idea that at the day of judgment, he will say to those who are saved, I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me water. I was naked and you gave me clothing. And they will turn around and say, but when did we do this? I have no recollection of this. And he said, whatever you did this to a brother or sister of mine, be he the least, you did it for me.
Now, why I'm bringing all the story is simply you see the transformation of what Jesus Christ has done in a tight situation where I thought initially I could solve this problem with an AK-47. Because months down the line, I was in church and there was this commotion in the morning. There were sirens all over the place. And I wanted to know what was going on. Shortly after the service, the imam initially that I had met came and said to me, Hassan, we have nothing to do with this. I said, what are you talking about? He said, no, all this, the issue of the bomb. I said, what bomb? Now, incidentally, a Muslim youth was approaching the church with a device to attack the church. But another Muslim youth noticed, so he raised an alarm and they called the army. The young man was arrested, and so the siren I heard was the anti-bomb squad coming to take the device away. So he said, Hassan, I promise you, as long as we're in this community, nothing will happen to your church. We are here, we are Muslims, and you are our brother. Nothing will happen.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you don't need an AK-47, you need to love people.
Just love.
Wow.
Pulling me Be thou my vision,